In this session, we'll review the recently published book, A Christian Worldview Primer for 21st Century Americans by Stephen Heath. This is Mr. Heath's first book publication. The primary intended audiences consist, first, of those principally younger readers who have recently come to the faith, but who have not been well catechized in the faith they now claim. They may have been overwhelmed by the love of Jesus and found new and promising relationships among those similarly struck by God's love. But in the euphoria of newfound belonging, they may have yet to be confronted by the demands that love levies on them. At a broad and summary level, the book hopes to provide those newly coming to the faith with the rational support that backs up that initial experience of God's love and further grounds it in history and reason. The book may also prove to be a help to those a bit older who grew up with only a somewhat tangential or casual connection with Christianity. For a variety of reasons, even that casual association withered in adulthood. But as the emptiness of materialism becomes manifest in their individual lives and in that of their society generally, there are those who look back wistfully at the Christian past and are willing, if not eager, to give Christianity a second look. Their motivation is not from any overwhelming emotional experience of God's love, but from a rational desire to fill the gap left by the futility of materialism. Whether from desperation or mere curiosity, they may be willing to take on as a hypothesis that the emptiness they sense is, in fact, that God-shaped hole that Pascal said cannot be filled by any created thing, but only by God, the Creator. But in a still broader sense, the book is for everyone who is faced with the big questions of origins, purpose, and destiny, and is willing to consider how Christianity's basic concepts address those big questions of where we've come from, why we're here, and where we're going. All of us must deal with these questions one way or another. That is, everyone else. Origins, purpose, and destiny. These are the framework questions for any worldview. The Christian worldview is no different in this respect. Christianity has its own answers to those questions, and its worldview is built on them. The book starts and ends by relating the matters of origins, purpose, and destiny to what we learn of those big questions from the God who reveals himself as Creator, Judge, and Redeemer. But first, the book attempts to address the matter of worldview generally. We're told that each of us has a worldview. We're all swimming in one worldview or another, but like a fish in the ocean, we may not appreciate the ocean in which we swim until or unless we realize that there is or may be a world outside of and different from the ocean in which we swim and on which we depend. Up until the mid-1800s, Western civilization managed without the need for the word worldview, even though the concept it embodies might have been all around us. It was only in Germany in 1848 that Western civilization had need to coin the term worldview. The concept has generally to do with how individuals or groups comprehend the world around them and deals with it. Western civilization probably got along without such a word for as long as it did, because prior to the 19th century, the way the world was perceived within each tribe, nation, or civilization was common within the tribe, nation, or even civilization in question. It was only when different and competing and irreconcilable ways of comprehending the world confronted each other, at first across different civilizations, and then even within a single society, that is, when these differences became manifest within the same times, places, and circumstances, that there was reason to coin the term worldview. From the Christian worldview perspective, there are really only two standpoints. There is the perspective of the God who reveals himself and the perspective of humanity on its own. Woven throughout the book is the concept of the two ways, the way of God and the way of the world. How this group or that comprehends the world and organizes it starts with how they deal with the matters of origins, purpose, and destiny. These matters are related to another concept, the concept of religion. The book proposes that to understand the concept of worldview, one must relate the questions of origins, purpose, and destiny to the related concept of religion. And to do that, one must also consider what is meant by religion. The book identifies 5 senses in which the term religion is used. It proposes that religion may mean either answers to the ontological questions that involve supernatural forces, answers to those questions that involve organizations, any answers to those questions that allow for either supernatural or materialist answers. Religion may refer to whatever the individual or group regards as being of ultimate concern, without regard to the ontological questions, but focusing on such things as money, power, fame, and the like. And a little bit differently, religion refers to whatever it is that holds any given society together, whether common beliefs and values or sheer military or political power. The book approaches religion as if it refers to any answers to the ontological questions, whether supernatural or materialist, and whatever it is, if anything, that holds any given society together. In summary, this book deals with the matters of ontology, religion, and worldview from a conceptual perspective. The concepts involved in ontology are the questions of where did we come from, why are we here, and where are we going. The concepts involved in Christianity's answers to those questions are creation and fall, judgment, and redemption. Creation teaches us that we are all the handiwork of an all-powerful, all-knowing, everywhere present, eternally existent being who exists in a perfect harmonious relationship with himself. So our origin is in creation. Our purpose is to love God above all else and to love our neighbors as we love ourselves. Judgment teaches us that we have not fulfilled our duty of obedience to love God and others. On that account, we suffer the consequences of our disobedience, separation from the Creator who loves us and whose love gives us life. In love, judgment teaches us the truth about ourselves, that we have all sinned and fallen short of the mark set for us. But our destiny does not end in the separation we have earned. Rather, our destiny is redemption. Redemption teaches us that, just as God's love creates us and judges us, so in love he provides the means to restore the relationship broken by our disobedience. That means is in redemption. The Christian God who creates, judges, and redeems provides Christianity's answers to the ontological question. They tell us that we were created out of love with a purpose to return that love to him and to others. God's judgment tells us that we have failed in that purpose and would be destined to remain separated from him, but for the redemption he provides by taking his own judgment on himself. Creation, judgment, and redemption encapsulate and outline Christianity's worldview. From that outline, the book introduces the concept that gives Christianity its answers to those ontological questions. That concept is called revelation. Whatever we may know of God is only on account of what he reveals to us. Christianity identifies 2 means by which God's revelations are made known. These are called general revelation and special revelation. General revelations are revelations of God that may be perceived by all people directly, without the need of a mediator, that is, a go-between between God and us. The book identifies 2 general revelations. Those revelations are the creation itself and the conscience, God's law written on our hearts. Unlike general revelations, special revelations are revelations of God that depend upon a mediator. That is, they depend upon a go-between to mediate God's revelation to humanity. Those special revelations meant for us all are the law written on stone, the Ten Commandments, and redemption. Moses is the mediator of the law written on stone, and Jesus Christ is the mediator of redemption. In providing more detail about these revelations, the book continues its conceptual approach. For example, regarding the law written on stone, the Ten Commandments, the book presents the first three of these commandments as standing against polytheism, idolatry, and magic. Thus, the people of God's covenant acknowledge one God who makes them, for his purposes, as contrasted against pagans who have many gods whom they make for their own vain, selfish, manipulative purposes. The primer then identifies two commandments addressing the temporal nature of existence. They are needed because of time. In the first of these two commandments, God prescribes a recurring cycle of 6 days of work followed by 1 day of rest. Our days are not iterative, but are differentiated by this rhythm of work and rest. This recurring cycle keeps the covenant alive in time as the cycle constantly repeats every 7 days. In the second of these two commandments, needful because of time, God commands honor to be given to our parents. This addresses the generational nature of existence. Time passes from one generation to the next. This addresses the lineal aspect of time. We honor our parents as we take on the legacy they bequeath to us, make it our own, and strive to pass it along to our progeny, to those who come after us as well. If what is given to us by those coming before us dies with us, we have not completed the honor due the past who entrusted their legacy to us. To complete the honor due our parents, we must pay it forward until time itself is brought to completion. If the recurring cycle of work and rest keeps the covenant alive in time, the command to honor the past keeps the covenant alive through time until all things are made new. Finally, there are 5 commandments having to do with our relationship with our neighbors. Conceptually, they all have to do with things important to our neighbors, and the violation of those commands will deprive our neighbors of those valued things. They start with what is most important to our neighbors and work their way out from there. It works like this. If you violate the first of these commandments, the commandment against murder, you deprive your neighbors of that which is most important to them, their lives. If you violate the commandment against committing adultery, you deprive your neighbors of that which is next most important to them, their marriages. If you violate the commandment against stealing, you deprive your neighbors of that which is next most important to them, their property, their stuff. If you violate the commandment against slander, you deprive your neighbors of that which is next most important to them, their reputations. And if you violate the last commandment against coveting, you deprive your neighbors of that which is next most important to them, you, their neighbors. The book notes that pride is the first and greatest sin because it separates us from God, and jealousy or envy is second only to pride because it separates us from each other. Thus, in order to have a true neighborhood, God's special revelation tells us that we must respect our neighbors' lives, marriages, property, reputations, and finally, that we must be our neighbor's neighbor. This example of the special revelation of the law written on stone is just one example of the conceptual approach to revelation taken throughout the book. This review went into the detail it did regarding the law written on stone to exemplify what is meant by a conceptual approach. Other subjects in this section include the matters of the Trinity, the historical nature of Christianity, the importance of Scripture and the Church, and the Lord's teaching on prayer. The book takes the same conceptual approach to all of these topics. This review will not go into the same detail on these topics as it did on the 10 Commandments, but it hopes that example will provide a key as to how to break the code on the remainder of the book's subjects. Throughout the book, the reader is confronted with the concept of the two ways, the way of God and the way of the world. The way of God is the way of good, of respect for and obedience to God's revealed law. The way of obedience is the way of life and blessing. The way of the world is the way of evil, of scorn for and disobedience of God's revealed law. It leads to death and is accursed by God. There are many different expressions of this concept of the two ways. For example, Moses contrasted the way of goodness, life, obedience, and to be blessed with evil, death, disobedience, and to be cursed. Jesus spoke of those who belonged to him and those who were of the world. The Didache describes the two ways as the way of life and the way of death. In St. Augustine's terms, the way of God is found in the city of God, and the way of the world is found in the city of man. The city of God is governed by God's love through those who selflessly serve God's purposes in that law of love. The city of man is governed by those whose love of self acknowledges no power but that which they take for themselves and wield only for their own selfish ends. It is always simply a matter of the two ways. Also throughout the book, both explicitly and implicitly, is the idea that every society has some guiding standard, some binding together principle that sets its values. From America's inception until sometime in the mid-20th century, that standard was Christianity, as it was manifest in something called mainline Protestantism. Western civilization generally thought of itself as Christendom. Christianity provided a transcendent source of values, values that always appealed to their transcendent source, the God of the Bible. As Christendom waned in the mid-20th century, a new source of common values was needed, and the best secularism could come up with was individual autonomy. The authority of Christian teaching was replaced by the theoretical authority of each individual on his or her own. So entrenched had individual autonomy become that by 1992, in the words of Supreme Court Justice Anthony Kennedy, each one of us must be free to embrace his or her own concept of existence, of meaning, of the universe, and the mystery of human life. The book suggests that theoretically the authority over America's values is no longer a creator God. Each individual is theoretically the authority and arbiter over everything about his or her being, relationships, values, and understanding of the universe and life itself. I'm in charge of me, and you are in charge of you, and that's about all there is to it. Individual autonomy is the deceptively respectable term for it. Even if individual autonomy can be made to sound good, one cannot have a society in which everyone does what is right in his own eyes. In a social setting, we cannot all be free to do whatever we want. It doesn't make logical sense to say that common values can be found in the notion that we are all individually free to devise our own individual ideas of meaning and values. Individual autonomy provides no common values. Individual autonomy doesn't bind together, it divides and separates. In a social setting, each individual's freedom cannot be completely unbounded. If we are to live together, something must limit our freedom. But individual autonomy offers no limits on individual freedom. We must find the authority to provide those needed limits elsewhere. A social setting giving theoretical deference to individual autonomy does not result in a neighborhood, it results in an armed camp. To repeat, in a social setting, we cannot all be free to do whatever we want. The book notes this as it quotes from the Supreme Court case of Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Organization, the case that overturned the Roe and Casey cases, ending their holdings that there was a federal constitutional right to abortion. This quote from the Dobbs case is at least as important as the holding itself. Justice Alito wrote, While individuals are certainly free to think and to say what they wish about existence, meaning, the universe, and the mystery of human life, they are not always free to act in accordance with those thoughts. License to act on the basis of such beliefs may correspond to one of the many understandings of liberty, but it is certainly not ordered liberty. Ordered liberty sets limits and defines the boundary between competing interests. In order to have a society, there must be limits on each individual's freedom to act. It's just a question of what is the authority for those limits, and there are ultimately only two choices: the God of revelation or humanity itself. If, as a society, we defer to the God of revelation, we will be bound by the duties he levies on us all. If, as a society, we put aside the God of revelation, we will be bound by the dictates of the most powerful among us. This point is made throughout the book, citing among others not only Alito, but St. Augustine, John Locke, Gustav Alain, Alexander Solzhenitsyn, and others. Freedom, or liberty, has been mentioned throughout this review, but without giving specific attention to it. The book does deal with the problem of freedom as such. In talking about freedom, or its synonymous term liberty, America is in a modern-day Tower of Babel situation, a situation in which there is a gross confusion of tongues. Justice Alito points this out also in his opinion in the Dobbs case. He writes, "Historical inquiries of this nature, that is, whether the proffered right is deeply rooted in our history and tradition, and whether it is essential to our nation's scheme of ordered liberty, are essential whenever we are asked to recognize a new component of the liberty protected by the Due Process Clause, because the term liberty alone provides little guidance. Liberty is a capricious term. As Lincoln once said, we all declare for liberty, but in using the same word, we do not all mean the same thing." In a well-known essay, Isaiah Berlin reported that historians of ideas had cataloged more than 200 different senses in which the term liberty had been used. The book proposes that the key to understanding two principal different meanings of liberty lies in considering how liberty relates to rights and duties. Also, how one understands liberty, or freedom, depends upon how one understands the relationship between rights and duties. From the perspective of Christianity, duties precede rights. From the perspective of materialism, rights precede duties. The book makes the point that from the perspective of revealed religion, that is Christianity, duties precede rights. That is to say that we are only free within the bounds of the duties levied on us by God. From the perspective of materialism, rights precede duties. That is to say that the materialist supposes that in one's natural state the individual is free to do whatever he or she chooses and only has to deal with duties as the unbounded individual confronts others. Faced with others existing at the same time and in the same space, enlightened self-interest prompts the individual to contract away certain of his or her unlimited rights. So a theoretical social contract emerges as these otherwise unbounded individuals agree among themselves, for example, I will not murder you if you don't murder me. I won't commit adultery with your spouse if you don't commit adultery with mine. I won't steal your stuff if you don't steal mine. I won't slander you if you don't slander me, and so on, until they have compromised enough of their unlimited rights so that they might live not in harmony with each other, but in spite of the existence of each other. Not in a neighborhood, as God's law intends, but, as suggested above, in an armed camp. It is a place where everyone is primarily concerned to see to it that his or her rights are not infringed upon, rather than a place where everyone is primarily concerned to assure that his or her duties towards others are respected. To put the difference in summary, according to God, each individual is free to act within the bounds of the duties imposed by God's law. Each individual is constrained to act only within the bounds set by revealed law. This was the position of John Locke. But if humanity acts on its own, each individual is free to think and to act however the individual in question chooses. There are no constraints on the individual's freedom to think or act. Throughout the book, the irreconcilable ways of God on the one hand and those of the world on the other are laid bare. The primer delves into the differences between the ways of God and those of humanity on its own in matters of authority, matters of truth, matters of rights, matters of sex, matters of social justice, the relationship between religion and politics, and the precarious relationships among society's three basic institutions, the family, the value-providing religious institution, and the organizational civic institution, the state. Among these various matters, the one that is perhaps the most challenging for Americans to deal with is the matter of rights. The book identifies three categories of rights: natural rights, human rights, and civil rights. When considering any rights, the book suggests one must always ask, what is the authority granting the rights in question, and how are the rights in question enforced? Natural rights present the problems of authority and enforcement. This will be considered below. Regarding human rights, the book argues that there is no credible granting or enforcement authority for them. And regarding civil rights, they are simply the rights authorized and enforced by the civil authority, that is, the state. It is the matter of natural rights that present the greatest difference between the common American understanding of natural rights and what we are given through revelation. When thinking about natural rights, Americans will reflexively refer to their Declaration of Independence, which takes it as axiomatic, a self-evident truth, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The book makes the point that the God of Revelation has not endowed humanity with any primarily granted rights. Rather, our Creator has levied on us certain requisite duties. While from these duties one may infer certain rights, what the God of the Bible gives to humanity is not a bunch of rights, but a list of duties. That is, if I have a duty not to murder you, you may infer from that duty that you have a right not to have your life taken by me. But from the perspective of Revelation, it is not anyone's right to life that is at issue, but rather it is everyone's duty to respect the lives, as well as the marriages, property, and reputations of others. Similarly, those duties set the boundaries within which we have the liberty to act, and following them is the way to achieve well-being. The book notes that, regarding these proffered rights, Jefferson did not cite chapter and verse of Holy Writ, but rather appealed to their self-evident truth. From the perspective of Revelation, the question is the individual's freedom limited only by what he cedes to the state, or is the individual's freedom limited within the duties prescribed by God? The book argues for the Christian primacy of duties. Our founders told us that the Constitution they promulgated and that was ratified by the various states would only work for a moral and religious people. The book challenges 21st century Americans to take the founders' analysis seriously. Throughout the book, the implication is made that there are two ways and only two ways: faith in God or faith in self. Those are the only two possible objects of our faith. Christianity bears witness to one God who makes us for his purposes. Any other god or gods are gods of our own making, whom we have fashioned to control for our own vain, selfish purposes. And this one God who makes us for his purposes is a God who demonstrates for us that he is one who creates, judges, and redeems. That is where the book begins, where it ends, and what permeates it all the way through. Looking forward, the book suggests two major challenges. They are to pursue Christ's prayer for us that his followers be one, and that they be in the world, but not of the world. The book posits that the challenge of division and schism within the body is the Church's greatest problem and sin. Regarding the matter of being in the world while not being of it, we must realize that our Lord alone was the only one who could be fully in the world, but fully not of it. The rest of us are all tending toward one of the three possible alternatives, that is, being neither in the world nor of it, not being in the world but being of it nonetheless, and being both in the world and of it. The book proposes that the four major parties of the Judaism of Christ's day represent these various alternatives. The get-away from it all Essenes, living in isolated austerity out in the desert, exemplify the neither in the world nor of it alternative. The self-righteous Pharisees kept themselves separate from the world, but became a little parody of it, being not in the world, but of it nonetheless, with their own self-made pecking orders and giving self-given perks on account of their self-proclaimed superiority. In opposite ways, the Sadducees and Zealots represent the both in the world and of it alternative, but they do so in opposite ways. The Sadducees surrender to the world and play the world's game by the world's rules, fitting in with the Greco-Roman world with which they compromised and made peace. On the other hand, the Zealots take the opposite approach of fighting the world with the world's weapons. The book argues that in pursuing any of these alternatives, the world wins, and that, while we dare not ever declare ourselves to be fully in the world and not of it, we can constantly be on the lookout for signs of these dead-end alternatives creeping into our lives. As the book goes along, it constantly contrasts Christianity's answers to those questions of origins, purpose, and destiny with the answers given by the logic of the world. There never has been any way to reconcile the worldview that results from Christianity's answers to those questions with answers resulting from the starting point of humanity on its own. The book doesn't purport to be a substitute for lifelong learning, but it does provide a conceptual outline of the faith. It lays out the substantive bases for that outline. It contrasts what Christianity has to say about us with how the world deals with the big questions of origins, purpose, and destiny, and it points out the incompatibility between the way of God and the way of autonomous humanity. Finally, it challenges the followers of Christ to deal with their division, striving to be unified and to manifest that unity in truth. It reminds us that, in spite of all the ways we show ourselves to be in the world, we must always remember that we don't belong to it, and that in spite of our failures, we live in the hope of the coming city which has foundations, whose builder and maker is God.